Good morning, everyone, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to share a little bit about the kind of stuff we do. Just some disclosures, I do get money from research grants. I've done drug trials, and I get paid to talk from time to time, and I have a small business, but none of them are relevant for this morning's presentation. Most importantly, this is not my work. This is my work with many other people. My co-lead is Rafik Gubran, who's currently Vice President of Research at Carleton and was formerly the Dean of Engineering. You'll see how that is a very, very handy partnership to have. We have lots and lots of researchers, including many from here that have participated with our research. Tons of students. I think we've surpassed 25 students that have worked in our labs at different times. So it takes a village. Really what I want to talk about is, first of all, why even think about sensors and aging. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the work we've done in mobility and some of the work we've done in cognition. And I'll touch on future research, but that'll probably be some of the things that'll end up being the sort of the Q&A anyways. So, why sensors and aging? Well, it started when I was in geriatric rehabilitation here. Actually, it was at the St. Vincent site at the time. And this would be a typical scenario. I have an 82-year-old lady. She was living alone. She's had mild cognitive issues, mild medical issues. Puttering along, everything's fine. She falls, breaks her hip, goes to acute care. They put in some hardware, but of course she doesn't just get up and walk out of the hospital. So she does need rehab. We do some rehab, and we find that, yeah, her cognition's got a little bit worse because of the medications, maybe the anesthesia, all that stuff. Medically, she's a little bit more unstable, and of course her walking is not as good as it was before the fall. It's pretty good. Son is in Montreal, the daughter's in Toronto. She wants to return home, and now we're kind of stuck because she's not as good as she was. She wants to go home. The family really doesn't want to interfere with her desire to go home, but how can I feel secure discharging her home that this is going to be a medium-term successful solution? So we got together and started what we called TAFID at the time, a technology-assisted friendly environment for the third age. And it is this interdisciplinary team with all those groups. And our first grant was $40,000 with the Change Foundation. And we used part of it to upgrade an apartment that had already existed at Bruyère. Since then it's grown. In 2015 we joined the Age-Well NCE as one of the pillars on technology and monitoring of health remotely. And most recently in 2017 we opened a national innovation hub as part of the Age-Well group. And our focus, conveniently again, is on sensors and analytics for mobility and memory. So this is an aerial view of Carleton, and that's where our engineering action happens. And of course, this is Bruyère. The fourth floor is where our smart apartment is. This is an older picture, but I mean, it's generally an apartment for seniors that are transitioning. And we have simply upgraded it with many, many sensors. So let's talk a little bit about some of the work we've done in mobility. So our very first device that we that we acquired, was this pressure-sensitive mat. And one of these has 24 sensors. It's an array of 8 by 3, and it's fiber optic. So a fiber optic cable goes in, there's foam, a fiber optic cable comes out, the light gets transmitted from one to the other, and the more you compress the foam, the more the light is scattered, and of course it changes the amount of light that comes out on the other side. So we have a set of 3 here, and you can see how you can cover an entire hospital bed with 6 mats of 3. And the whole thing is, of course, requires some power, and data is collected in a box. So here gives you just an idea of how it works. This is our very first mat, a single mat of 24. And you can see as I press, you can see the image appearing on the computer screen. Essentially, it's numbers that are generated as you press, and here it's just the numbers are reconverted into a thermal image. And here, this is the bed that was actually outfitted with all those sensors, And now you can see here's an older adult doing a transfer. We have students who are doing monitoring. They're doing some data, timing, descriptive work. The mat is collecting data, and we also have a camera set up over here to actually videotape the transfer. And so what we really wanted to do was to say, you know, if this is going to help me with my 82-year-old lady that I'm trying to discharge, what I need is something that on a consistent basis will be able to tell me how is her mobility doing. Because at the end of the day, you know, she was here for rehab, mobility was the big thing. And so, you know, how can we monitor it? And so the question is, that first transfer of the morning, you know, is there a way of using that as an indicator of how that person is doing? And more specifically, can a pressure-sensitive mat put under a mattress help us to detect an increased fall risk? So again, just to show sort of the breaking everything down into bits and pieces, here we have one of our students sitting on the mat, and you see the image clearly, a bit of butt and a bit of legs. And now as she puts her hands down and starting to do the transfer, you see that there's pressure building up on the hand region. Then she lifts off, still has her hands down, but the hips are off, and then of course she finishes the transfer and is completely off. And you can see how you can take points in time and then monitor the pressure of these different areas, the hip, the left hand and the right hand, and you see certain things. Clearly there's a nice symmetry here between right and left, and the harder you press down, then you start lifting off. So it's a picture that you can imagine, and you can imagine a time scale. And so here's some, that was of course a very contrived one with the student. Here's some real natural images. So on this one here, you see them sort of shuffling, getting into position, and then the transfer off the bed. Here's one where there's a little bit of a rocking motion. They didn't feel comfortable just sort of leaning and pushing off. They sort of went back, and then just to get a little bit more momentum. And then over here, you see actually a failed transfer. So here's someone who sort of got up, but didn't have quite enough forward momentum, and then they sort of sat back again, and then they had to do it a second time. So you can see there's qualitative things here and timing things there. So we did a little study. We looked at healthy older adults, volunteers at Bruyère, and we compared them to older adults that had had a hip fracture that were doing rehab. And we picked them intentionally because we expected, we knew they had a mobility difference, but we wanted to see, can the data show it? So if you look here at the sit to stand on the video, so this is with the video going frame by frame, we were able to show there was a difference in timing. And the map data, when we used it purely, it showed the same direction. We did the same thing again with people with stroke. And then we said, how can we sort of have mat intelligence? And the easiest way to do that, of course, lazy science, is you take a line, you sort of go, here's your young healthy, here's the older healthy, our older patients with a stroke, or older patients with a hip. And the lazy scientist just draws a line across and says, oh, look, we got 97% correct classification, but obviously 1.8 seconds being a cutoff. So it just shows that, we can start thinking about how we could use mat data to help distinguish transfers over time. Now, timing is one thing, but there's all kinds of other qualities, of course, that matter as well. So here you see, again, a student transferring, and you see the pressure images. And now if you imagine sort of a line cutting across the middle, you see that there's sort of relatively good symmetry. And again, the student obviously has no mobility issues, so we'd expect that to be nice and symmetrical. So again, now if we add the dimension of symmetry, or what's the engineers like calling center of pressure, we can see that healthy older adults didn't deviate much from that center when they got up from bed, but anyone who'd had a stroke or a hip fracture had a lot more variability, and again, that was significant. But again, this isn't about proving the obvious. We know that, people that have had a stroke will have a different transfer than someone who hasn't had a stroke. So doing the obvious is one thing. What we really wanted to do is to see over time, right, if sensors are going to be at all useful, then over time we need to be able to detect changes. So we started a longitudinal trial where we put this map, took it out of the lab and actually put it in people's homes. And we collected data long term. So we had 22 people that participated, and the average age 77, typically a lot more women than men. And on average, 8 months, the data was being collected in the home. So if you take all the data and put it in a long line, it's actually 15 years worth of transfer data. And so this is just a typical person that we monitored, visits every month. We did clinical data, of course, as well as the map data. And so this is the clinical data: Berg balance, PFMP, timed up and go, 5-meter walk. And you can see that it's pretty horizontal. Here's someone who was relatively stable over the year. And looking at the map data, a nice crisp, vertical drop there and coming out of bed, a little bit of, getting into position, that's fine. And then at the end of the trial, so this was the beginning of the trial, and then a year later, you can see the signature, the transfer signature really hasn't changed a whole lot. On the other hand, we had a gentleman who was 96, had a stroke, came to rehab, was discharged in August, and then we went and put the mats into their home after rehab to monitor them. And here you see that initially the first transfers at home are sort of much more gradual, right? They sort of have more of an angle. They're sort of more, and a little bit more tentative. They're not sort of clean. And then you see a month later, at the end, this person asked for the mat to be moved after a month. You see how it's much crisper, a much cleaner transfer, much more like the other one we'd seen before. So this is starting to sort of do what we want it to do, which is to be able to see, like if you're always like this, and then you wake up one morning and you look more like this, we're going, wait a minute, something has changed. Today may be the day you're at risk of falling, and we want to intervene and give you the rehab before you break your hip and not come and pick you up and then give you rehab afterwards. So, a very quick overview of some of the things we've done with mobility. And now we're going to look at the cognitive side of the house. So when I think about cognition and what technology can do right now, I think it can certainly help us in the assessment. It can help us with the prognosis, hopefully, and then it may actually could be part of an intervention as well. So I'm just going to give you some quick snapshots of some of the work we've done in each of these dimensions. So this trial is called the Western Ottawa Whack-A-Mole Study, WOW for short. And so the premise is people with more moderate to advanced dementia, if you try an MMSE on them, you might get a score somewhere between 10 and 17, but if you have between 10 and 17 one time, and then a year later we do it and you're between 10 and 17 another time, there's not a lot of sort of clinical validity and changes in that range. It's a very blunt tool at that low end. You sort of got a floor effect. So first of all, the MMSE is not reliable. Second of all, no one loves it when I pull out a piece of paper and I say, we're doing a memory test today. Don't worry, don't sweat. I mean, just take away your driver's license, but relax. This is going to be fun, and we'll do a memory test. Of course not. So it's very stressful doing a test. So if we can do something that's a little bit more fun and less, it doesn't even have to be in front of me for that matter. If we can do something that doesn't require me to be in the room, the white coat effect will be less severe. So the third item then is the question of how much data can you collect. If you come and see me, you might see me once a year, at most twice a year. So that's the number of memory tests I can do. Whereas if I give you a game to take home and you play it once a week, that's a whole lot more data, right? It's sort of the idea of if you have two hemoglobin values, it really doesn't tell you a whole lot other than it was this on this day and this on this day, but who knows what it did in between, right? So if this is the idea that maybe we can collect data more on a continuous basis. So we did a trial out in Canada, so that's the Western Ottawa part. in an adult day program for dementia. And the usual criteria, they needed to have a diagnosis of dementia, but they couldn't be hearing or vision impaired and couldn't have severe arthritis simply because of the interactivity with the game. And we followed this group twice a month with visits by the research assistant. They would go to the day program at a certain time, and they would take out 2-3 people at a time, and that group would work on the whack-a-mole. And so, despite the fact it's a blunt tool, it's the only one we have, so we did do MMSCs on everyone. A Trails A, Trails B is too difficult for this group, and the ramparts. So the sort of set shifting part of it. And we put the game on a tablet, a Samsung, and the game was actually designed with colleagues in Agewell in Alberta. So they had sort of computer science skills, and I had the clinical skills. I said I want the game to look like this to test these cognitive domains, and then we had the engineers go, and when they play it, we need to have a back end where we can pull out the clinical data so that we have the whole package, because otherwise it would just be another app and it wouldn't help us. So basically, I think everyone knows whack-a-mole. The mole pops up, you hit them on the head, and in this case you just touch them with your finger. I added a component of having bunnies pop up from time to time. We like our bunnies. Please don't hurt them. So it's inhibition, right? So you poke, and then it comes up and you whoop, you got to stop yourself. So inhibition. And you can see how, of course, there's a delay from the moment the mole appears to the moment that the finger touches the screen, and we can measure that. So this is preliminary data. We're actually still collecting this data, but just gives you a quick snapshot. And so the dotted line is the mean of the group, and we had one person that maybe didn't have dementia, may not have belonged in the group, but it doesn't matter. They were there with an MMSC of 24. And we had one person who was really at the very bottom, like an MMSC of 12. If you've ever had a person like that in front of you, they're quite severely impaired. And so we simply looked at the level attained. And the level, if you get 80% of the moles, you go from the first level to the second level. And the second level is a little faster, so everything goes a little faster. And if you get 80% again, you go to the third level and everything is faster again. So so when we talk about game level, so this person, the person with the lowest MMSE score, on the first day played the first round 10 times. Was not get it fast enough to move to the second round. Whereas the average was sort of 4.5, and then you see the highest performing MMSE person was at 6, and you see they consistently stayed above the average. This person actually did quite well over time, getting close to the average at a couple of points. But just the idea that if we used it as an assessment, one-time assessment tool, we do see a little bit of spread. In the same way that average reaction time, now the 24 person is the fastest, and the 12 person is the slowest. Average percentage of moles hit, just another way of counting sort of that level idea. And so we're still working on that data, and what we're going to be looking at is, over time, can we use the gameplay to identify the people that are either stable over time or deteriorating cognitively over time. So that's the ultimate goal. We haven't done the analysis. So that was the assessment part. Now prognosis. One of the important things that patients always ask me, even on first appointment, is is this going to get worse over time or not, right? Because cognitive impairment can be scary for the people and the families. Often, most of the time, I actually can't predict the future, right? I have to go with, look, my experience is that, right, whatever on average, but each person is going to be individual. But what if we could design some technology tools that can make us better at predicting the future? And so we are looking at it in two ways. One is a functional test, which is very much like the whack-a-mole. The other is an EEG test. So the idea, dementia, is caused by cells in the brain that are dying for whatever reason, right? After a while, that changes the circuitry in the brain, right? And after a while, that change in circuitry actually affects my day-to-day functioning. So, theoretically, and this is one of the things we're looking at, we should see electrical changes before we see the functional changes. We'll see, and so what we're taking is 30 people with MCI plus or minus, and we'll be tracking them over 3 years, and we know within 3 years, the MCIs will either have declared themselves as simply permanent MCIs, or will have transitioned to early dementia. And so, we have the healthy controls in this case are the care providers for the person with dementia. And so they're a little younger. As you can see, a 53-year-old, that's a daughter of a person with dementia. And the MOCAs, you could see, 28 is a typical normal, and 22 is typical for someone with MCI, so we do have the right population. So sorry about the fuzziness of this picture, but we're using technology that was designed actually in BC. It's called NeuroCatch. Again, AgeWell partners of ours. And so it's a complete package that has the EEG electrodes, but it also has small earbuds. And what happens is you get a sound. So there's a number of steps, but one of them is a sound where you start off with a regular sound, beep, 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 beep. So you have that odd one, right? So you'll get used to this one, and boom, you get the oddball. And when you take that oddball, that one we use and we look, how does the brain react to that odd sound? That's all in a package. NeuroCatch does some data analytics and then comes out with a sort of a diagnosis. We're not doing that. We're doing the longitudinal part of that, so we're breaking it down. But this is something, a typical ERP result, and I don't have time to talk about the details of ERPs, but trust me that they're great in time. They're not great in location. As you can imagine, our skull is pretty hard, so the idea that electrodes on the outside are going to be able to say exactly where in the brain something's going on, not so strong. But the timing is very good. So here is a normal N100. N100 is typically the reaction of the brain to a stimulus. So you see something, or you hear something, and then your brain reacts about 100 milliseconds later, okay? And so here's the wave of a normal person, very classic N100. And then here's the person with mild cognitive impairment, got the same shape and everything, but you notice a slight lag, right? And that is very classic. It's very much the diagnosis of early mild cognitive impairment is this sort of delay, the slowing of the electronic signals, the slowing of the cognition. In fact, if we measure brain speed, we know that people with dementia, they get slower over time. So again, these are very preliminary baseline data. So that was the EEG side. This is the functional side. So this is an interesting product out of Australia. It is culture proof, language proof, okay, which is kind of important when you're trying to do cognitive testing because all the things we do are in English or French. And so my patients from Afghanistan and Fiji and whatever, I have a much harder time comparing them to the rest of my population. So the beauty of Cognigram is that it's been tested and shown to be valid in various, all the education levels and all the cultural levels, because it's basically playing cards. So first test is a speed of processing task. The card is face down on the screen, and then all of a sudden it flips, and then you press yes just to say, yep, it flipped, and I caught it, right? So it's, again, a speed of processing. How quickly can I identify that this happened? The second level is this a red card or a black card? So it's face down, it flips, and then you have to say, yes, it's red, or no, it's black, right? So that's a little bit more thinking. So it's not just, it turned and I did. It turned, I thought, and I did, right? So it's a little longer and has more levels of cognition in it. The third set of tests is, have you seen this card before? So you'll see a 2 of diamonds, a 5 of spades, a queen of hearts, and then another 2 of diamonds. So it's no, 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 yes, right? Because the 2 of diamonds has shown up again. So this one is not only thinking, it's also using working memory. And between those set of tests, they claim to be pretty good at diagnosing you having a cognitive problem or not. And so this is sort of our group. We haven't completed the recruitment of all the patients yet, or the participants, but this is the first batch. And you can see, as predicted, the healthy controls are in the darker color and consistently do better than the people with MCI in all of the dimensions that Cognogram tests. So again, this is not what we're setting out to do. We're not trying to prove that people with MCI are slower than people that are healthy normals. What we're trying to show is over time that this will change, and if we can go after 3 years, here's the group that now has transitioned to dementia, here's after 3 years the group that stayed with MCI, and we can see they started separating, and if we can find the earliest point of separation, we'd have a tool that would help me in the future help someone predict, right? You'd better get your affairs in order because you have a chance, an 80% chance in 1 year's time of transitioning to dementia, right? So this being the cognogram side, the functional side, and the EEG side, we're doing the same thing. We're going to track them over time, and then we're going to look and see, are there early electrical changes in the brain that can help us, predict who's going to decline and who isn't. And by the way, an EEG costs about $50 for the actual intervention once you have the material. Compare that to a CT scan, right, a couple of $1,000s. And if we think about all the people that are aging that will have some form of cognitive assessment in their lifetime, that's a ton of money that this healthcare system is going to have to find, or we're going to have to find new ways of doing things. And so that's why we went sort of cheap and old technology, because we're trying to be responsible from a fiscal point of view. So we've talked about assessment, now the sort of prediction model, and what about intervention? So we have now had 9 homes in Ottawa have this set of sensors installed. These are people with dementia, moderately advanced dementia. These are people who are at risk of nighttime wandering. And so, I'm not getting my arrow, but okay, so we have motion detectors. We have a door sensor. You see that one being installed here. We have a pressure-sensitive mat under the mattress. We have a Sonos speaker. We have a hub. And the way it works is, essentially, when the person with dementia is in bed, the system is shut down, it's asleep, everything is good. When they get out of bed, the message gets sent from the mat to the hub, from the hub to the cloud. In the cloud, we've programmed an action that says, turn on the light to the bathroom. It goes back to the hub sends a message to the light bulb, it turns on, and now we have a lit path to the bathroom, because we figure, 2 in the morning, the most likely place someone is going to want to go is the bathroom. If they follow the path back to bed, great, the system goes back to sleep. Let's say they look at their watch and they go, oh, it's 2 o'clock, I should be walking the dog. And then they go to the kitchen. Now in the kitchen there's a motion detector. It sends a message to the cloud. The cloud says, no, kitchen at 2 a.m., not allowed. And we send back a message through the speaker, which is the spouse or the care provider, that says, honey, come back to bed, it's the middle of the night. If they listen and go back to bed, great, the system goes back to sleep. Otherwise, if they do go to the front door and open the front door, then of course full alarm goes off and we wake the care provider. Dual action here. One for the person with dementia, we're cueing them, trying to get them to come back to bed, which is better for them because if they have a better night's sleep, the next day their cognition will be better. But more importantly, the person caregiving doesn't sleep with one eye open, right? That's what the spouses of my patients tell me. Every time the bed moves, I go, is tonight the night? He's going to walk out the front door, and we read about him in a paper next week. So it's a dual purpose. And so, yeah, so it's in the Ottawa area. We're hoping to do 40 homes. This is hard research. It's been a year and we've done 9, so we'll see. So here's a typical person. I'm not going to go through the details, but they have dementia, they have a spouse, they do wander at night. And this is kind of a neat report. So this is what we can do with the technology, right? So we have all these sensors going off, and we collect all the data in the cloud, and then we can bring it down and then put it on a graph. So yellow is no one's in bed, so that's the day. Light blue is the person with dementia has gotten into bed, but the spouse is still up. Dark blue is they're both in bed. Red is the person with dementia is up, the other person is still in bed, right? So you can see how typically the person with dementia sort of goes to bed 10-ish, sometimes earlier, like I don't know what happened here, you might have been sick or something, but typically 10-ish. The spouse, it's sort of more 11-ish, right, the dark blue, and then she gets up around 7:30, and he can get up anytime sort of maybe 9-ish, 10-ish, right? And we can see, typically he'll get up once sort of between midnight and 2, and then maybe one other time later on in the night. So again, for those who do machine learning work and artificial intelligence, developing sort of the footprint or the fingerprint for this person's activities then allows us, if things start going crazy, to say, you know, there's something going on. So let's say one night he gets up every hour, right? That would be completely abnormal, and that should be flagged by the system. And then the next day, the home care nurse or the daughter or the spouse might want to say, okay, what's going on? Why did we get up that often? Maybe it's a UTI. Who knows? Maybe it's delirium for some other cause, a pneumonia, who knows? But that's sort of the idea. Always when we think about sensors, it's sort of that intelligence you develop. So this is just a graph of one night. And so again, dark blue is in bed. So here you see they've gone to the bathroom, and we know where they've gone. Once they went to the living room after going to bed. And so yeah, those are the points where they've gotten out of bed. And this is just, again, where the caregiver goes to bed and then where they get up. This is the one time they went actually to the front door after having gone to bed. That was the time that the speaker said, hey, get back to bed. And then this particular participant actually never went out of range again because this person, the wife, actually didn't want to use her own voice. She said, he never listens to me anyways. So Siri tells him, get your butt back to bed. That'll freak him out and he'll never forget that. And it worked for them. Not how we designed it, but what the hell, right? Sometimes Siri can be the right person for the job. So he wandered every night. He'd go to the bathroom anywhere from 5 to 50 minutes. After the first time, he never went downstairs again, and there was no problem. So we are measuring the impact on the caregiver. So here we have pre-trial. She had sort of mild to moderate anxiety. Afterwards, it's about the same. Here, in her case, on the emotional well-being, she was moderately stressed. After the trial, she was back into a normal range. So again, this is anecdotal. We only have 8 right now, but we are hoping to get 40, and then we'll look at it a little bit more with statistical power and all that. But just to show sort of the anecdotal stuff. She was satisfied. Her husband didn't go back down again. In the first few installs, we did have technical difficulties, and it's the reality. The first card, you run off the line, it's not going to be perfect. So we do have some things to tweak. All right. So, what has changed? And this is the tough question my wife asked me the other day. She goes, look, you've been doing this for 15 years. Whose life have you really changed? The short answer is no one's, right? Because no one has this technology in their home for good. It is still only experimental. So, however, what we can say is that now we have places where we can add technology as soon as we get it tweaked, and as soon as we have a company that's willing to work with us, right? So now, the mobility is worse. Yeah, well, we can put a bed sensor in there. We can do motion detectors in the home. We could do wearable devices, and we can actually track their mobility now over time. So we can discharge them with technology, not today, but very soon. And then we can continue to monitor their mobility. What about their cognition? Yeah, we can do gameplay. We can look at instrumental activities of daily living. If every morning I go to the fridge, pull out my bowls, my milk and then cereal and whatever, there's a sequence of events, the cupboards get opened in a certain pattern, all of that is machine learnable. And if we break that pattern, we got to go, wait a minute, what's going on today, right? And for the son and daughter and maybe us care providers, we can monitor this online. So one of the dyads with the dementia actually worked nights. The son, his mom with dementia moved into his house, he was working nights, and she wandered at night. So you can imagine how risky that is. But what we did is we set up his phone so that he could see every single action she did during the night. So he's at work, he quickly opens his phone, she got up at midnight, went back to bed at 12:15, she went to the kitchen, the voice spoke to her, which is his voice in that case, Mom, I'm at work, you're at my house, please go back to bed, I'll be home soon. And he could track it, and he knew everything was okay. Reassured him at work, she heard his voice, reminded him of where she was, because she'd moved from her house, which of course had a completely different layout, to her son's house. When she woke up, she goes, where am I? How do I find the bathroom, right? With the light, it helped her find it. With the voice, it helped her remind where she was. Right. So where is this all going? Clearly, the world of sensors is increasing exponentially, like the wearables, like motion sensors, and the price has hugely come down, right? So an infrared camera, which used to cost $300,000, now you can get for $299 and stick it on your iPhone, right? So the technology has rapidly changed. So there are now an infinite number of sensors, and we need to now think about clinical applications for these sensors, because I always say it's great you guys are doing this cool stuff and you have the cool cars and the cool homes and whatever, but I don't care about that. I care about social responsibility, and my social responsibility is for older adults to stay where they want to be for as long as possible. So see if we can hijack more sensors and use them for good, the Robin Hood model. The next thing is sensor fusion. So any one sensor is only going to be able to give you a part of what you really want to know. So the timing, sure, it helps, but it's not the whole story. If you add timing and symmetry, now you're getting better at saying, was this a good transfer or not? Then you need to know what side of the bed is it on? Who else was in the room? Because someone might do a beautiful transfer, but if it's the daughter who helped them out of bed and make sure they were symmetrical, so now we need to know timing, symmetry, and who else is in the room. So the more sensors we have, the more we can triangulate, and the more likely we are to be able to predict that what we're measuring is actually what we're measuring. The biggest difficulty right now in the artificial intelligence world is, and I'm not the engineer, but the engineers are way better at explaining this, but the problem is we do this a month later. That doesn't have any great clinical validity. So we did a trial in palliative care, telling someone, a month later, yep, your mom died on January 5th. That's not terribly useful. So what we need to do is we need to analyze in real time. That is a big, big, big computing problem. It's a big question of data, transmission, how much data is looked at locally, because the more amount of data you send, the bigger the pipe has to be, right? So you have to do all kinds of engineering things, and we're not there, but we're getting very close. Actually, our lab has just this week been able to replicate data that we did, old data we'd had on the mat, and we were able to send it to the cloud and have Watson, IBM's Watson, do the same analysis as we did a month later, but do it almost in real time. We played the video, and Watson said, this is what's going on. So we're getting there, but sort of that real-time capability is the big, big issue that has to be tackled next. Scoping. I have 5 sets of mats. I do 5 homes at a time. That's great. We have 15 years worth of data collected that way. It worked, but that's not real life. There's no home care agency that's going to say, yeah, you got 5 mats, I'm good to go. No, you're going to need hundreds of mats. You have tens of thousands of older adults in Ottawa alone, and they're going to be collecting data. That has to go somewhere, and you have to do something with it. It's big data, but it's the scoping. Being able to multiply the work. And of course, that requires industry partners and other providers that want to be involved in this kind of research. So this, I just love this. This is the smart fridge. So the guy goes, "Another beer, please, Hal?" And the fridge answers, "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. The bathroom scale and the hall mirror are reporting disturbing flab anomalies." Right? And that is really the idea, right? We want to be able to say, "Oh, this morning's transfer wasn't so good. This morning's gameplay wasn't so good. Did they have a small stroke last night? Did they, what's changed? And do we need to send someone in?" Right, and I think I'll stop there, but what I've said is people want to age in place. We have absolute requirement that technology be part of this solution. We don't have enough home care nurses, and we don't have enough dollars to pay all the home care nurses for when our generation is going to need home care. So we have to do things differently. We like unobtrusive sensors as much as possible. We're part of AgeWell nationally, and we hope that we're on the cusp of making hopefully a big change, and we're hoping to get a trial across Canada started, where we will have homes across Canada sensorized, and we'll start collecting data and learning to deal with all those challenges that I mentioned earlier. The challenges are the big data, the data fusion piece of it, user interface, right? No one wants to see 1,000 graphs in the morning when they come to work, right? So we have to figure out how we take that tons of data and make it into something that works for clinicians and family members. Clients have to want this somehow. We have to figure out the cost and the privacy and ethics issues. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Any questions?
Oh, you added that one, okay, because it was on the original.
Yeah.
So thanks, Frank. One of the things that I was interested in with the whack-a-mole, obviously there was some learning as they got better at it. So how do you see using that?
Right, so actually that was completely unexpected, right? I mean, we're talking with about a moderately demented to severely demented group of patients in the day program who, they're going there to provide respite to their care providers who are burning out, having to spend 24/7 taking care of them. So I expected that there would be a little bit of learning and a little bit of improvement. I certainly didn't expect this. It turns out, of course, if I had done my homework, that this is not learning as in new information, right? New information learning is a different kind of learning than procedural learning. So this is more like, can I ride a bicycle, right? I haven't ridden my bicycle for a year now, but if I get on, I'm pretty good. I'll probably pick it up fast and ride again. I don't have to think about that. It's different than I haven't seen this group of people now in a year. What are all their names, right? That's harder. So it's a different type of memory. So we didn't expect that, and now we have to sort of rethink. My original idea was we're going to start baseline. The first few weeks we're going to develop our baseline, and over time we'll see a decline in gameplay. That's not what I've seen. I've seen an improvement in gameplay for everyone. Now we do hit a plateau after about 7-8 weeks. So now the question is, on the other end of the spectrum, so a year later, are they still up there, or are they starting to decline? This is, this may be the wrong game, right? By far, I don't claim that, that this is the right game. It's a first shot at it, and it's sort of a proof of concept, right? I think the idea that, and these people, they keep doing it. Like it's once every 2 weeks, and that was the other question, right? Will they go, okay, I'm not playing on computers at all. I won't touch a tablet. Because these are not people who grew up with tablets, right? They got their dementia at a time when we were just developing tablets. So this is a brand new thing for them, and yet the whack-a-mole. So that's why we picked whack-a-mole, because these are people who went to the fair, right? And they had the mechanical moles that popped up, and you had the big hammer, right? And you'd actually whack people. So the moles. So not supposed to. Sometimes you just, whoops, sorry, get out of the way. But no. So So we'll have to see if the data, proof of concept, it works. Games, you can play them. everyone was surprised. The families couldn't believe it, that they were playing this game. And they actually went home and then they talked about it and told their grandkids, who were always on their phone, of course, saying, hey, you know what, I played this game, for those that could remember. But yeah, we'll have to see. Not the curve I expected. Yes.
Thank you so much for this fascinating talk. It's very interesting to hear what you were. I was wondering, why was there only 10 families who signed up for the trial whereas you started a year ago? I would think that people would run you over and everybody wants it, especially in a trial where they don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, so you're right. So we were thinking like you, right? Wandering, a huge problem. They're one of the scariest things that could possibly happen to someone with dementia. The biggest risk in Ottawa, right? In the middle of winter, you walk out there, you don't have long, right? And yeah, so the recruitment has been very difficult. So I think there's a couple of things at play. First is that there's only a subset of the population that has dementia. We knew that. But then if you take the group of people with dementia, there's only a small subset that's wandering and still at home. Because what happens is as soon as you start wandering, the wife burns out or the husband burns out and calls, CCAC and says, get me a place because I can't do this. I can't be up all day and all night, right? And so there's, I think that's, it's part of it is there's only a very narrow window. So very few people that are still doing it, right? And then if you're doing it, you're so busy coping with life, you're not listening to the radio to hear announcements about research projects in the domain. And even a family member that says, hey, I heard about this thing on CBC, for people with wandering, what do you think? And they go, they don't have any capacity. They don't know I want anyone calling me. I don't have the bandwidth. So I think that's part of the challenge in recruiting. I think, and I'm hoping that if we can find a partner that actually commercializes this, that it will become so known by normal advertising and what real businesses do, that people will hear about it when they don't need it, and then when they get to that stage, they'll go, oh, wait a minute, I remember hearing. Right now, it's like, I don't think they have the bandwidth. So, but I was totally surprised. So now the other thing is we have to exclude certain people. So we can't have households with 10 people in it, because whenever someone gets up or someone comes home late, every time you can't have the alarm going off and the light in the bathroom going off every time the dog walks around. So we right now are very strict in our criteria. But I was very surprised. And everyone, the Alzheimer's Society says, what, you don't have 40 people yet? But we've told everyone, right? So it's not, I think there's a number of factors involved, but very difficult work.
You haven't heard people say, I don't want these smart devices monitoring. Because I would think that.
So I do think that some of them sort of go like, look, I'm at the end of my capacity, adding another level of complexity. I don't do technology. I don't want anyone watching what's happening in my house. It's possible. We don't ask them. Like if they say, no, we don't really spend a lot of time going, okay, no, don't answer, don't go to watch your husband now, just tell me about why you don't. It's very touchy. This is a very fragile group of people, so we have to, it's an interesting dilemma. Yes?
Are you looking at like wearable sensors linking up with the smart apartment? Or because I know there's some that can detect falls and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so the question of wearable sensors has been a debate for the last 15 years in our lab. I'm from the school that I know that when I'm in a hurry, I leave the house when I'm late for work. I leave the house without my phone, without my keys, without anything, right? And I come here and I go, what was I thinking? If an older adult wakes up at 2 in the morning with big pressure on their bladder, right, I'm not sure they're going to sit at the side of the bed and go, okay, wait a minute, before I get up, I have to put on my wristband or I have to find my alarm or whatever. They're just going to run to the bathroom. So I'm always concerned about when we ask an older adult with mobility issues and cognitive issues to remember to do a step that we're going to lose data. So if possible, I'm of the school that the more you can build into the environment that doesn't require an older adult's actual personal action, the better we are. Other problem with wearables, batteries, right? You have to remember you need to charge them. So now, the study we're about to start does have a wearable in it, against my preference, but I want to test it and I want to see, right? How often does data stop transmitting because they forgot to charge it? How often is it lying in a drawer where there's no movement for 3 days? We'll know, right? We'll know. So it'll be sort of a validation for my thing, but so it's a debate in the industry, right? There's so much good about wearable devices. It's for our generation, right? Wearing a Fitbit means nothing, right? And sharing data with everyone, who cares, right? That's what we do. So it's a different mentality. For that group, it's still a little harder. Wearing something that makes me look older, like a walker or a hearing aid or some kind of funny bracelet, they're not hot on it as a rule. But yeah, it's an ongoing debate.
That's about all the time that we have for questions. Thank you so much, Frank. That was a terrific presentation.